Hey guys, it's Jack, and I've been thinking recently about how I haven't really done a video about the talent shows yet. The talent or variety shows on Drag Race have become a staple for the show, and yet I feel like we just don't talk about them that much. Now don't get me wrong, there are some very memorable and iconic performances from these talent shows, but I never see people talking about them as a favorite challenge or something they look forward to. It's just something that kind of happens more and more frequently now, but not a lot of people are excited because it's so standard. Now I'll go into why I think this is the way it is a little later, but first let me just talk about the talent show overall, some of my favorite performances, and what really works for it and what doesn't. The talent show originally started in All Stars 2 and then every season after that except for All Stars 7. It's now made its way to the main series of Drag Race with season 14 and some of the international seasons with Holland, España, and France. The challenge is very straightforward because it is just a talent show, but I think the simplicity plays to its strengths. In every Drag Race Challenger episode, there's always going to be judging that's a little iffy, and the talent show is no different, but I think on paper, the idea of doing a talent show to showcase these queens' individual talents is really smart of them to do. These talent shows normally happen at the beginning of the season and serve as a way for these queens to say, hey, this is who I am and this is what I'm serving. Almost all the time, the queens have control over what performance they do. Sometimes it gets a little iffy with lip-synced music. Someone like Coco in All Stars 2 was going to do a Janet Jackson number because she is a Janet Jackson impersonator, but they kind of said no to that because it would have cost them a lot of money, so she was kind of screwed over and then did this interesting performance. Licensing was definitely the biggest issue for a while in these talent shows, but on season 14 we saw some pretty big songs get performed. So I definitely think we're moving towards a place where these talent shows offer queens full creative control. And from production side, these talent shows are pretty easy to manage as well. Queens do their own performances, they basically just have to worry about lighting, music, and some background dancers. It's pretty hands off for them. If there's not a lot of licensing involved, it's very low budget and the queens just do what they want to do. And now let's get into that. With so many talent shows under our belt now, there's definitely an overlap of what things have been performed. Just because there's an overlap in these types of performances, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just something that you can spot out right away and kind of figure out the placements from there. The biggest and most frequent performance we've seen as of recent is the bitch track. And let's be real, it's for good reason. It's easy branding, it's catchy, it gets people to stream the song, it's really smart to do. The performance as well is often very safe and very entertaining too. Because the bitch track is mostly about lyrical content and how they perform, they can get away with lip syncing as opposed to someone who sings live. So with the bitch track, it's like, here's my brand, here's a pretty cool performance, and normally these performances are safe with one of the queens placing high or in the top. I think the bitch track is just so smart for queens to do because at worst it's unmemorable, and at best they have a catchy song that people are going to be listening to for a while. Sweet and Sour by Lemon gets stuck in my head all the time. Even if the performance wasn't that great, I still think it's iconic. Cornbread Song, of course, I wish it was on Spotify. Angeria, Akiria, and Mo, most of these songs are really catchy, and I think it's just really smart for these queens to do. Adjacent to the bitch track, we have live singing, which I also think is pretty smart to do if you stay in key. We saw with contestants like Jeremy and Monet that if you don't stay in that key, you probably will land in the bottom, but if you hit the marks that needed to be hit, you're definitely safe. It's another really easy way to promote original music. It got me into Moving Parts by Trixie Mattel, and none of the judges on the panel, no shade, are very technical singers, so if someone isn't doing their best performance, they're probably not going to call it out because the performances are just so consistently good. Basically, if the vocals sound sonically okay and they aren't doing something stupid on stage, they're probably going to be safe. Which is pretty surprising to me because I feel like the singers do get a little shafted on the show. I mean, we've seen on España and France 2 live singers win, but for the US seasons, the only queen to place in the top was Mo in All Stars 4, which starts the running theme that we'll get back to a little later, that entertainment value to RuPaul matters more than technical ability, which I think is okay in the long run, but sometimes it's a little frustrating. Up next, we have dance performances where it's like the bitch track, but the dance is like the main aspect of the performance. I'll throw something like Aja's in here because obviously her song was a bitch track, but you know, the dancing is what really drew people in at the end. Even though the judging panel doesn't really bust a groove that often, they still are a lot more nitpicky when it comes to dancing performances. At the end of the day, if it's a very solid, entertaining performance, they're most likely going to call it safe, but sometimes if someone's wearing flats or it just doesn't wow them, like with Janie on UK vs. the World, they'll throw them in the bottom like that. The reasons are just a lot more tangible to the judges, unlike with singers, so people have to make sure they are on top of their game or adding something extra to their performance to make sure they're at least safe. I still do think that dancing performances are some of the most entertaining on the show. They're high energy and easily consumable. I think All Stars 3 had some of the best, but I do get the complaint that dancing performances need something more now because there is so much overlap from the past. Up next, I'll talk about pretty unique performances that have been done a couple times on the show just out of coincidence. We've seen pole dancing now, I want to say 3 times over various seasons, and each time it's still a marvel to watch. The technical ability alone is justification to keep someone from the bottom, and most of the time they're going to place pretty high because it's just so entertaining, and you just gotta marvel at the fact at how difficult this can be. Magic is another one that I wouldn't look at for a drag queen to do, but the fact that we've seen it a couple times, it makes me so happy. I honestly think it's one of the riskiest things to do because if you don't nail it, obviously you're gonna be put in the bottom. It's just such an easy way to get there. But both Kitas did such an amazing job with their performances, and their risks completely paid off. Something like Magic is just so interesting because you could do it in so many different ways, but the end product is always going to be extremely entertaining to the audience as long as it doesn't fail. Another one that's popped up a couple times now is painting. We've seen it be a little successful with Manila and not so successful with Samantha. It's another really risky one because if you don't execute the painting well, obviously it's reason to put you in the bottom, but also to keep the audience's attention while you're painting can be pretty tough. People are basically watching you paint, and if the end product isn't gag worthy, they're probably not going to care. Manila's was pretty great and Samantha's was pretty funny. It landed her in the bottom, but I thought it was hilarious. Another performance that has performance rooted in it is burlesque, but I'm still surprised that it's popped up so often. Moreover, that none of the queens that have done it have really screamed burlesque performers to me, but I think that's what makes it so fun. At first, the brand of Roxy Andrews doesn't really scream burlesque to me, but when you think about Thick and Juicy and then what burlesque is, it makes a lot of sense. Burlesque is just such an interactive audience builder, and I think it's a really strong performance to have, especially if you nail it, or if you don't, you kind of slip and fall and end in the bottom. And the best part is that every single queen who's done it has done it pretty differently than the last. Roxy was insanely gorgeous, polished burlesque, Ben de la Creme obviously a lot more comedy there. Farrah was also pretty standard burlesque, but there was a lot of camp in it with the set that she had set up. Vivaldi was very camp, I could go on. They all have different elements mixed together to make their performance really unique. There's been a decent amount of burlesque performances, but I would never mind a lot more. And finally, one of the most iconic performance categories that's popped up in a very different way every single time, spoken word. Of course, we had Tatiana's same parts, one of the most iconic moments of the show. It's campy, it's hilarious, it subverts our expectations of something that we would think she would do, and it's so risky because of this fact. When I first watched this season and they announced that Tatiana was going to do a spoken word, I was like, oh, this is going to be weird. Spoken word is just not the crowd pleaser a lot of people would expect out of a talent show, so when it's executed this well, I'll eat my words and be happy that she was in the top. And then we get the complete other side of the spectrum with Mariah, who I think deserved a top placement for sure. It was so chilling, so well written, so well performed, everything just made you think, and I think that's what she wanted out of a spoken word piece. It's really stuck with me over the past couple years, and I think it's one of the most unique and interesting performances that we've ever seen. But again, like I'll discuss a little later, serious performances aren't as entertaining as something that will make RuPaul cackle, so she wasn't put in the top. And then we finally get to performance art performances that are all very unique in their own right. You know, something like Onyx giving birth on España, or Jimbo giving birth on UK versus the World. Very, very interesting things. Something like Jimbo's talent especially is basically anti-talent. I mean, we see her with a lunchbox on it that says talent, and then when she pulls it out, there's nothing in it, basically implying that she has no talent, so what is she gonna do? It deconstructs the expectations and replaces it with absurdity, which at the end of the day was really entertaining, and it got her in the top. I feel like Onyx's was also kind of in the same realm of that, but it was a lot more just bizarre. It was so bizarre. It was very in line for brand for Onyx though, so I can't complain at all, and it was entertaining in a very unique way. But then we get other performance art pieces like Vanessa that's kind of in the same realm as Mariah's, but it's not spoken word. It was so well performed, so well acted. I was so thoroughly moved by it, and I think that you guys should definitely check this one out. And of course, we have Willow Pill's performance that's kind of the happy medium between Vanessa's and Jimbo's. It moves you, it makes you think, but it's also extremely funny because you kind of have no idea what's going on up until you think about it at the end. These talents, regardless of how you think they're performed, always stick in your head, and I think that's what the performers want at the end of the day. I'm going to mention now some pretty unique performances that have only been seen once on the show before I get to the elephant in the room and the worst thing you can do on a talent show. Any excuse I can get to talk about Raja, I will. I think her dress sewing skills were just so unique and so interesting for everything else that we've seen. You can get nitpicky, I guess, by saying, oh, she already had it cut and it was already basically set up for her to just sew and then put on, but still, it's pretty hard to do in a minute with all the pressure going on, and I think she nailed it. Like they said in the critiques of the episode, Raja's presentation was really cool, kind of keeping the audience guess, and it made the end product so much more satisfying and relieving. And then we move on to her season 11 sister, Scarlett, with the bubbles, and I think it's so smart out of nothing. It's true that Scarlett's brand isn't really bubbles, obviously, but it is kind of stupid, campy humor, and I think she really nailed that here. It takes a lot of talent to take something as simple as bubbles and create a lot of jokes and layers out of it, but I think she nailed it. Gia Gunn also gave one of the coolest and best performances of the show that deserved a top 2 placement, but it was too serious for them, so of course it didn't get it. It's in the same realm as singing or dancing, where it took a lot of technical ability, but unlike those two, we never seen it on the show like this. The presentation was magical. We just see her in her element, and it really deserved that top placement, and it's frustrating that she didn't get it. So now that we got most of the categories out of the way, let's talk about the big one, stand up. It's really interesting because Tatiana's same parts won because it was funny. Yara's bitch track won because it was funny. Trinity the Tuck's performance won because it was funny. But as soon as you try to be funny in just a stand-up sense, you don't win. And I think the main reason is because it is such an energy killer for the rest of the performances. The comedic performances that did win had music over them that helped guide the energy throughout the performance. But with stand-up, you're just up there telling jokes, and if you don't land the first one completely, it's probably gonna kill the rest of your performance. Other actual stand-up challenges on the show work because they're in the mood to listen to jokes, while in a talent show, they want to see crazy performances, and you're not really getting that with stand-up. I don't think it's impossible to do well in stand-up on a talent show, you just have to have the right performance placement, but most of these queens just don't get it. They're often placed after some very energetic performances, so when they come out and just tell some jokes, it's just not going to go over as well. There has been a single stand-up performance that didn't land in the bottom in one of these talent shows, that being in the episode on Drag Race France, but then another stand-up performance did land in the bottom in the same episode. Every single other performer who has chosen to do stand-up has landed in the bottom, which is crazy. At this point, I think it's just best to avoid this type of performance and go for something like anti-talent like Jimbo did. It's just never gonna fare as well because the energy isn't rightfully there like with other types of performances. So after breaking down all these different types of talents and hinting over the video, I've noticed a pattern that's a little frustrating, but it also makes sense. It's become clear that the RuPaul Judge seasons favor entertainment over technical ability, and I think that's okay. Both technical ability and entertainment are valid reasons to give someone a win, but at the end of the day, it is a TV show, and I think entertainment value brings in more ratings than someone just singing super well. There will be people online being up in arms like me, saying that the technical talents don't get as much praise, but that doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of the entertainment talents carry a lot of purpose for the show as a whole. And honestly, rewarding the entertainment talents can create more innovation for both types of talents as well. People will see queens going outside of the box and being rewarded for it, someone like Jimbo on UK vs. the World, and now they'll see that and be like, maybe I should try something like that. And then other queens who have talents that maybe aren't rewarded as often will think to themselves, how can I step outside of the box to make sure I'm seen? At the end of the day, I don't think there's a correct strategy to have going into a talent show. Most of the time, I think if you have passion for your talent and can execute it well, you're probably going to be at least safe. Just stay away from stand-up and then you're golden. So now we come back to the original question of the video, why aren't talent shows as praised as other challenges? And I think it comes down to what I've explained over the course of the video, nothing is rewarded as correctly as everyone wants it. Everyone is going to look at each talent differently, so when something isn't rewarded as much as something else, it may be a little frustrating to people, or they just may not see the challenge as that exciting. Oftentimes when I make videos on topics, I slowly learn to enjoy the topic over the course of the video, and I think that happened here. I kind of enjoy the talent show a lot more. I think we're just getting to the point where it's really standard on Drag Race. I mean, we get it basically every All-Star season, and again, it's leaking into other franchises of the show. So seeing it so much and seeing it so early on, there's just not a lot of hype that can be built around it. Something like Snatch Game, even though people are getting a little sick of it, still builds hype because it comes on later in the season. While with the talent show, it's the season opener. So we often get people buzzing about it in the beginning, but by the end, they aren't as excited about it because we've had so much Drag Race in between. I definitely do think it's the perfect first challenge because it could showcase so much of what the queens have to offer, and even though a lot of the novelty has worn off, I still think it deserves a lot of the praise of a really good challenge. Thank you guys so much for watching. I kind of took this video in a different type of approach, so let me know how you enjoyed it. Follow me on all of my social media, and I'll see you guys soon with another video.
Is that it?